Hi, everyone. Welcome, welcome. We are on parking diversion, so we may still have people streaming in here, but we're going to go ahead and get started now. Thank you, everyone, for being here. My name is Rose Hayes, and I'm Director of Engagement for the School of Nursing. We will be recording today, live streaming to room 201, and using closed captioning behind us here on the screen. The recording will be available for sharing after the event as well, so we'll be able to spread the word. I'm going to kick us off, and I'd like to start by telling you about lead FBI negotiator Chris Voss. In his masterclass on persuasion, Mr. Voss shares evidence-based tactics that help him to earn the trust of some of the world's most ill-intentioned people in some of the most high-stress situations with individuals who hold some of the deepest convictions. And clearly, when he is negotiating with people about the release of hostages or the diffusion of bombs, he is not starting out in a place of agreement with the perpetrator. And yet, with certain tried and true techniques, he is able to soften their anger and bend their beliefs. He's able to open their minds and move them to change. How does he do this? He does this by leading with empathy, not with force or bluster, as we're often taught to think about negotiations. He asks for their name and gives his so that he can recognize and humanize the characters in a new narrative that he will craft with them. And he listens. Above all else, he seeks to understand the perspective of his audience, even if he vehemently disagrees with them, because a story can't exist without change. You need to understand where your audience's journey begins in order to position them as the hero who will grow and change as the story. And so these are just some of the tactics that storytelling shares with high stakes negotiations. Good stories are grounded in empathy. They settle into people's neurons and become the narrative that they tell about themselves as they move through their day. Stories can change people's notions of themselves, what they're capable of, and what's worth standing up for. No offense to policy briefs and textbooks, but stories stay with us a lot longer than those. So if the tactics of good storytelling can work for FBI negotiators, they can work for you and help you to open people's minds and influence change. That's what we're here to talk about today, the building blocks of good stories and how to use them in your lives and your careers. We'll start with a keynote address from Dr. Roxana Chicas. Dr. Chicas is an assistant professor at Emory School of Nursing and a lead researcher in environmental and occupational health. Her work focuses on addressing health disparities, particularly those that impact outdoor working communities, like farm workers and construction workers exposed to extreme heat and chemical hazards. As a bilingual scholar with lived experience and family history related to her research, Dr. Chicas blends data with narrative to inform the public and decision makers about the issues she studies. Her commitment to environmental justice and health equity has made Dr. Chicas a trusted voice in academia and beyond. Importantly, she advocates for practical, sustainable solutions to keep workers safe while also addressing systemic inequities. After we hear from Dr. Chicas, we'll enjoy a panel discussion where experts from across documentary, VR, gaming, theater, and big media will share their perspectives. I'll introduce our panel after Dr. Chicas speaks. You'll have the chance to ask the experts questions, see some of their amazing work, and even experience immersive forms of storytelling like VR and gaming for yourselves. Thank you for being here with us, and I will hand the podium over to Dr. Chicas.
Welcome, everyone. Thank you for being here. As I've grown older, I've become to appreciate more how profound the power of storytelling is. Because storytelling isn't just a beginning, a middle, or an end like we're taught in grade school, or a factual recounting like we're taught in science. It's an art form, a persuasion, and it inspires us because it places everyday heroes, just like us, just like you, at the center of difficult and challenging journeys. And it shows how they overcome it in spite of incredible odds. Farm workers are everyday heroes. They work from sunup to sundown, and they're dying to live. Heat is a threat multiplier. You'll hear that a lot in a lot of climate change conversations. Heat is considered the #1 weather-related killer in the United States. And Deadly Heat is a documentary that investigates the growing dangers of extreme heat among outdoor workers as Florida politicians roll back protections. And so I'll start with our first kind of clip. All right, so effective storytelling is powerful because it can move people to act. Think about it. It's a compelling story can get you to go and vote. It can get you to buy something. It can get you to donate to a cause. It can get you to create film or art, a play. It can even start a movement. Storytelling shapes how we understand one another and how we take action. No wonder that storytellings have a lasting impact. They connect us, they inspire us, and they open our minds to change the world. I'm a researcher, so I'm constantly surrounded by data and methods and more methods. And when I started my PhD, I heard someone say that us researchers, we provide the data for organizations to do the advocacy. Don't get involved in that. And that kind of struck me. Um, and so as I worked collecting data in the fields with the Farm Workers Association, I listened to the stories of many of the farm workers, and I started wondering, like, why shouldn't I tell their stories? Why do we as researchers limit ourselves to academic journals, conferences? I began to think, the general public funds this research with tax dollars. They should know what is happening with these studies and what is happening in the world. So I want to tell the general public the story of the realities of farm workers that they live day in and day out. And that's when I realized that perhaps my most powerful allies are journalists. Because they dedicate so much of their time to stories, to bringing these stories to life, making them accessible and real for a wider audience. They combine the power of journalists, scientists, and advocacy groups, I hope will lead to meaningful change, one where we will improve the living and working conditions of farm workers. I feel a deep connection with the farm worker communities. There's an estimated 3 million farm workers in the United States, and it is estimated that 50 to 75% of them are undocumented. That means that every day in this country, no matter your political affiliation, we all benefit from undocumented workers 3 times a day. I was undocumented. When I came to the United States, I was 4 years old through the southern border, and I didn't get documentation until I was 18 when I got temporary protected status. And you may wonder, why is it that farm workers, why is it that people, immigrants, make this very treacherous and dangerous journey to come into the United States? Why do they do that? To come and till the soil, cultivate crops, and harvest our fruits. I'll tell you, it's because they are hungry. They're hungry for work, they're hungry for food, they're hungry for opportunity. So my mother faced that same hunger and brought me to the United States. So I understand how it is to live with a precarious immigration status. So that's why it's really hard for me when I hear Maria Enriquez Fonseca, the wife of Salvador, who died from heat stroke, say in the documentary, he was supposed to go to the United States, go and work and come back, do it the legal way through the H-2A visa program. Yet he died. Let me be clear, dying from heat stroke should not happen. Heat-related illness and heat strokes are preventable deaths. It is very much preventable. Yet in the 21st century, we still fail to value the life of farm workers. And this disregard for their humanity is not new. We can trace this back to when we used to enslave people. In both then and now, there's this disturbing continuity that persists, the complete disregard for human dignity, the lack of respect for inherent worth and value. A person continues manifest in actions that humanize and exploit farm workers. And I'm going to show you a clip of how this is still happening. And I think Jeremy did a great job powerfully capturing this. These workers are asking for the right to survive. They're just asking for water, rest, shade, rest breaks. Rest breaks throughout the day. You know, go to a conference or you have a long meeting, you take these breaks. That's all they're asking for. Cesar Chavez, a civil rights leader and farm worker activist, once said, "The fight is never about the grape or the lettuce. It's always about people." This profound truth remains as relevant today as it did during his time, because ultimately the struggle is about recognizing the humanity and the worth of every individual. Agricultural exceptionalism, that's something that you may not have heard about, but agricultural exceptionalism is this policy, this concept that agriculture is so important to us, to our survival. I mean, it is a matter of national security. And because of that, we cannot burden the agricultural industry with too many regulations. So what this has resulted in is that farm workers have become basically invisible before the law. And I'll give you one example. Farm workers are not allowed to form unions. They were excluded from being able to form unions. Yet, growers, they can have powerful lobbyists. They spend millions upon millions of dollars every year lobbying to Congress. The farm workers, they have to rely on small community organizations. They're not allowed to unionize. California, there's a union, allow it for the state of California. Very few states, less than a handful of states will allow farm workers to unionize. Another example is we have no federal heat protection standards, which would protect farm workers. Even though OSHA, the Occupational Safety and Health Administration, has known for decades that heat is an occupational exposure threat to their safety. And we still do not have federal heat protection standards. 5 states do have federal heat protection standards: California, Colorado, Washington, Oregon, and just recently, last month, Maryland. Words matter. I'm going to show you another clip. Notice he said, "We work a lot of people." So like, you work machines, work people. And so that phrase kind of struck me when I'm listening to him say that we work a lot of people, and also him saying, you know, it's possible that he had some other medical condition. Let me just be very clear that just because you may have a medical condition, diabetes, high blood pressure, that doesn't mean it's okay for you to die. That's like you're going to die from heat stroke. Stroke is preventable, and what's killing people is the heat. So, and it also reminds me of another powerful quote from Cesar Chavez that says, "Our language is a reflection of ourselves. Language is an exact reflection of the character and the growth of its speaker." Words matter. But how we speak is who we are. Both the grower, where Salvador died, the one you just listened to, and State Representative Rick Roth, one that led the charge so that Florida would pass this law that would not allow local governments, local county governments, to enact heat protection standards, to allow workers to have rest breaks. The way that they speak about farm workers is so dehumanizing, and their words reveal who their character is, their true character, one that dehumanizes, diminishes the value of the people they speak about, farm workers. Words matter, stories matter, and farm workers matter. As my academic journey continued, I encountered more and more statistics, but I knew that the stories behind the numbers needed to be told. And while I was being interviewed as being an expert in occupational heat stress among farm workers, I decided that I wanted to use my platform along with my education, my training, my culture, my identity, who I am, to start telling the stories behind these data points. As public scholar Nancy Krieger once said, as the history of public health amply demonstrates, not a contradiction to be a public health professional and an activist. Both are necessary to fulfill public health goals. I can tell you more statistics. I can tell you that farm workers are 35 times more likely to die of heat-related death than any other group, followed by construction workers, and many of them who are young. And you may say, well, that's awful. Those statistics are awful. But what if I told you the story of Salvador, who was a worker, who was a husband, a son, a friend, died on the first day that he came to work to the United States? Or the story of Jonathan and his brother Wilmer. I'll show you a clip. So the system is designed to work a lot of people and then discard them. But you know what can never be taken away? The remarkable resilience, courage, and strength that farm workers and construction workers possess. Their unwavering drive to endure for the love of family, for the hopes of their children's being able to thrive in a country that may give them the opportunity. Break the cycle of poverty. Maria, Jonathan, Lorenzo, and Araceli, who participated in our heat stress studies, they believe in social change. They believe in the power of telling their stories, and they are determined that the lives lost are not in vain. So I'll leave you with one final quote from Cesar Chavez, and that is, once social change begins, it cannot be reversed. Not uneducate the person who has learned to read. Not humiliate the person who feels pride. You cannot oppress the people who are not afraid anymore. We have seen the future, and the future is ours. And I hope that you are all inspired to tell your stories and the stories of the communities that you advocate for.
Dr. Chicas. That was so powerful. It was amazing to see the clips. The quote is full, and thank you for sharing your experience. We're going to transition to part of our event. I'm going to take a moment to introduce our panelists. So could our panelists actually come, please take, I'll do some introductions and then I'll come join you all in a moment. Feel free to spread out too. We had it kind of scrunched for safety reasons, but we can. So joining us today is Jeremy Young. Jeremy is senior producer at Al Jazeera English based in Kensington. He graduated from Emory in 2000 from our journalism program. Maybe we'll have to bring it back. Jeremy joined the Al Jazeera Network in 2006. He helped to launch the award-winning program Fault Lines, which is the program that this documentary was a part of, in 2009. Over his tenure, Mr. Young has crafted high-profile narratives and exposés on topics of global importance, covering war in the Middle East, the criminal legal system in America, and environmental crimes in Latin America. His documentaries are known for their in-depth analyses, rich opposing voices, and impactful storytelling, earning acclaim from peers and audiences alike. Mr. Young's commitment to bringing large-scale attention to otherwise invisible and underreported stories continues to shape global conversations on justice. This year, he won his first ever Emmy Award for Shark Fin Hunters, a story about illicit shark fin trafficking out of Peru and Ecuador, and we will get to see a clip from that today as well. We're proud to call him an Emory alum and are grateful for his willingness to pay it forward and share his knowledge with us here today. Can everyone please join me in welcoming Jeremy? Next, we have Marilyn Owen. Marilyn is an Atlanta-based actor, playwright, director, and educator. Miss Owen began her journey with professional storytelling at Atlanta's Academy Theater in 1979, and she has a wide range of notable roles, including Amanda in the Glass Menagerie, Dr. Vivian Baring in Wit, and Fraulein Schneider in Cabaret. A member of SAG-AFTRA, an Actors Equity Association, Owen has earned multiple accolades, including 2 Susie Bass Awards. Am I saying that right, Marilyn? For Outstanding Lead and Actress, and 8 Susie nominations. Her solo play Need premiered at the Alliance Theater in 2018, earning the 2019 Jean Gabriel Moore Playwriting Award, and her most recent play, Salvage, will be a featured selection in the Appalachian Theater Festival at the Barter Theater this February. Here at Emory, Miss Owen recently directed Mud by Maria Irene Fornes, an exploration of power, poverty, and language, which we'll talk more about as it's especially relevant to our conversation today. A longtime faculty member of Emory's Department of Theater Studies, Ms. Owen has taught Introduction to Acting in collaboration with the Spanish-Portuguese Department, co-created Taller de Teatro en Español, a class designed to enhance Spanish language proficiency through theater. Owen continues to contribute significantly for performances, writings, and mentorship. And finally, we welcome Dr. Ahn is a professor at the University of Georgia's Grady College of Journalism and Mass Communication. Directs the Center for Advanced Computer Human Ecosystems, where she studies how interactive digital media, such as virtual reality, gaming, and social media. Dr. Ahn investigates how virtual experiences shape thoughts, feelings, and behaviors. Applying VR to address real-world challenges in health. Dr. Ahn is the Deputy Director of the Center for Children's Health Assessment, Research Translation, and Combating Environmental Racism, also called Charter, funded by a $4 million grant from the National Institute of Environmental Health Sciences. Dr. Ahn leads initiatives aimed at sharing environmental health knowledge with people in formats they can remember and use. She's also funded by NSF, NIH, NOAA, and the EPA. Through her innovative research and teaching, Dr. Ahn continues to advance the field, emphasizing the power of storytelling in virtual environments to affect change. Can everyone please welcome Dr. Ahn? The first question is for Jeremy. Jeremy, thank you so much.
1, 2, 3. There we go. Now we're rolling. I started to research the deaths of outdoor workers in the state of Florida for this project. And as I started to come across story after story, I found that oftentimes the articles did not mention the name of the worker who died or anything about them, where they came from, who their family was, why they decided to come here. They would often be based around a press release from the Department of Labor or OSHA where they had fined a company. And in Salvador's case in particular, it just said a 26-year-old man from Mexico died on the first day on the job. And I just thought that how horrible this person who made this ultimate sacrifice for everybody, who we consider an essential worker, and we don't even honor the sacrifice that he made to help people get fed. And so when I set out on this project, my goal was to tell a story about a worker who died and really inject it with humanity and figure out, who was this person? Where was he from? How did his death impact his family? How do they feel about it? And I think we were able to successfully do it in this story. And that was my main goal for this project.
That curiosity can lead you to pull the threads and dig so much deeper. And I want to marinate on that for a second. Projects are these 25-minute films. About that approach and how it helps you to build connections.
Yeah, sure. So our documentaries for Fault Lines, they're 25-minute films. And I think in the best circumstance, if we're doing a really good job on our project, we're able to identify a single story, a single narrative that we can tell over the course of 25 minutes. And a lot of things kind of have to go right for that to be able to happen. I thought, can I tell them about a couple of the characters and we can, okay. So I thought it'd be helpful for this conversation to just share with you a couple characters from some of our recent documentaries, a little bit different than Roxana's, to give you a sense of how we identify a character that we think can be the, the bulk of a 25-minute story. The first clip that we have that I'm going to show you is, her name is Molly Peoples, and she goes by Miss Molly. She lives in Shreveport, Louisiana. And Miss Molly's son, Brandon, was in prison for 25 years based on a racist law from the Jim Crow era. And when I met Miss Molly, her modus operandi was she's going to stay alive in order to see her son walk free. She survived cancer. She survived COVID. She was going to do whatever it was to be able to see her son walk free. And I think what makes her empathetic as a character and why people who watch the documentary feel for her, one is because the love of a child, right? The universal, she loves her child. She doesn't want to give up on her child. And she wants to be there for her child. And then the other point relative to our storytelling is that when you have an individual who's up against an unjust system, an unfair system, and they refuse to give up their fight, is something that a viewer can get behind, an audience can get behind, and people can recognize as value. So I'll show you a little clip. This is from the Jim Crow Convictions Fault Lines episode from 2021. So that's Miss Molly Peoples. You can watch that on YouTube. It's called the Jim Crow Convictions if you're interested. And then I wanted to show you a different type of character who I was attracted to for a different reason. Her name is Evelyn La Madrid, and she is an environmental prosecutor based in northern Peru. And she allowed our team to tag along as she was investigating illicit shark fin trafficking rings in Peru. And I think one of the reasons why Evelyn is such a strong character is because the motivations for her work, she recognizes that if we don't stop slaughtering sharks at the rate that we're doing, it could damage our entire oceanic ecosystem. And she wants her children to be able to experience the same environmental pleasures that she's been able to experience. But then even moreover, when Evelyn goes down to the harbor to inspect fishing boats and fishing vessels and look for shark fins, it's all men. It is just a sea of men that she has to encounter. And she has the fortitude. She's kind of like a badass like Roxana is. And she can stand up to people. And I think it's something that viewers see and recognize. And so here's the clip. This is from the Shark Fin Hunters Fault Lines episode from 2023. So I like that you can see her physically stand up, and I think it's something that as a character, people want to root for her.
Character people can get behind. That is a really important way that we build. Other tactics that you all use to build a little tactical and share some often tell our students and our faculty that
So I have been trained as a media psychologist for the past couple decades now. And what virtual environments are really powerful at is to convert a lot of these stories into experiences. And as scientists, we face a lot of resistance, right, for the messages that we want to send to general public, especially if they're polarized on a particular issue, they're not listening. We call this selective hearing, selective understanding, right? They are only looking at the things that they want to look at. Even if you force exposure, a lot of them can't really get through that filter. It actually solidifies their original stance on something. These experiences, on the other hand, we're able to get them to see, hear, feel things in ways that they will understand because they believe their personal experience is far more than a top-down message from any scientist. And so some of the tactics is to let them just come to a particular experience and feel it for their own, see it for their own as if they're there. And a lot of the storytelling that we want to deliver is to try to deliver a message that's so visceral that it seems like they're experiencing it at the moment. And I think that's where a lot of these immersive technologies can really stand out. For example, if we want to get people to listen about Jim Crow laws or about redlining or any sort of these environmental injustices, instead of getting them to sit down and look at something or read something or watch something, we can get them to walk with a particular character through their stories. As they're telling a story, they can share these activities together. They can essentially get to a place where we call as a common ground of communication. Without that common foundation, communication begins in this stilted, sort of this imbalanced way. And therefore, in order for everybody to start with the same page, that shared space and the shared activities that they're doing together in these virtual worlds tends to open up minds so that they can communicate better.
For me, I start a little differently. I start with when I'm creating a story or selecting a story or entering into a story, I look for what makes my heart beat faster. And that tells me that I'm all in and I care and I want, there's something I want to explore. There's something I want to fight for. And there's a question I have. And to me, the best stories present obstacle after obstacle to a character and transform something in that character's life. And by that process, they transform something in the audience too. The witnesses to a story are just as important. And so I look for stories of transformation that ironically transform me when I tell them. And I look for stories that make my heart just pitter-pat.
Love that. That's so funny that you say that. I had a mentor who told me challenges at them because if your character is
Well, a little different. You know, I'm not a expert in storytelling. So, but when I started doing interviews with the media, I started to notice that a lot of the journalists were asking me, like, who are you? They were really interested in knowing about like my background. Why was I interested in farm workers? And I kind of learned that the audience sometimes is very curious about us. And so I try to sprinkle a little bit about my background into these stories because it makes connection. It makes it more real that I'm not just this researcher who's getting a whole bunch of, a lot of findings, a lot of data, but there's actually something more profound to what I do and why I do it. And that seems to really connect with audiences.
For follow-up from Mary Lynn, along the lines of audience. And the people about knowing and understanding active, hands-on. Hollywood movie kind of thing. A little bit, and when people hear the tactics do I want to use?
So we know that there are different media platforms, and for every platform, these media channels offer different features. And the storytelling's format needs to fit these features so that it becomes more appropriate. So the way that you tell stories in VR is necessarily very different from the way that you would tell stories through, let's say, video, or the same story through pamphlets. And you can't have a single story being told exactly the same way across all of these platforms. This is why when we try to take the scientific academic conference model and then try to do it hybrid, it never works, right? And so for each media platform, when we convert it in ways that really kind of brings that to life, for example, these virtual reality simulations are great for very sensory rich, sensory motor rich experiences that seem to be happening at the moment, but they suck at delivering very dense information. So lots of information because people are so busy touching, looking around, doing things and exploring that their cognitive resources just can't span everything. And if you throw in a lot of information like a textbook, it's never going to work. Versus a video format is conducive to certain types of stories being told. And the younger audiences are wanting faster paced, different formats of editing using the channels that they are using. So instead of getting them to appreciate books, for example, it may be faster to sort of tell these same stories using the platforms that they're already enjoying. Just a couple days ago, I learned about sludge videos on TikTok. Have you heard of these? Yeah, sludge videos are evidently, it's the same screen, one TikTok screen, but they're so bored at looking at just one screen, they divide it up in half, and they have two simultaneous videos playing at the same time. Or it's one video playing and they're playing a mini game at the bottom because they want that much stimulus. Now, for us as content creators, if we want to tell them that that's a wrong way to do this, it's a bit of a challenge. It's probably faster and easier for us to accept that times are changing, audiences are shifting, and to try to accommodate and meet them where they are, right? Instead of trying to bring them to where we are as content creators. And so that gets me to think a lot about, well, maybe we shouldn't look down on the content that they're currently consuming and to try to leverage these audience preferences to tell very impactful stories that they are willing to listen to, because that's sort of the biggest driver of a lot of the audience apathy. They feel like it's not relevant, therefore they're not listening. There's just too much to pay attention to. In order for us to break through that clutter, we do need to study the audiences and meet them where they are.
Oh boy, this is a rich question. I tend to be a purist in this way. But over the years, I have seen theater change and try to adapt to this shortened format with a lot more visual input. But what theater does do that you mentioned that so beautifully is the sensual aspect of seeing, hearing, touching, and the fact that you are in the audience breathing the same air as the people in front of you. It makes it so immediate that the same things you might see on a screen, you can't do in the theater because it's so impactful. When someone dies in the theater, as in Mud, we had a character, the lead character dies from a gunshot. It's a different experience for the audience than it is with the separation of a screen. So the elements in theater are more judicious, and we can also have the experiments in theater. Theater has a long history of being mythic, and things can fly, and animals can talk. And I'm thinking of Tony Kushner, who dropped an angel from a ceiling, and it was believed and it was true to that moment. So theater can do all these things, and in my opinion, it offers a different experience that plants you right there in that world if you can lean forward and receive it. It's a challenge. It's a challenge, but I feel like it's more necessary than ever for that to happen.
Fascinating. It's almost like, how do you define immersiveness?
Yeah, yeah, yeah.
I do have a follow-up for you, but I wonder, Jeremy, Roxana, do you have anything to follow up for Mary Lynn? Poverty. I'm sure you on examples
Mm-hmm.
have
Okay.
some of your
Sure, sure. Well, I always enter into each story a little differently, depending on the role I have. But as an actor, I usually find some way to read or just immerse myself into whatever the world is, to listen to music. I journal a lot. As a director, I also do research, and I went down to South Georgia because the play Mud is about a trio of people who are just devastated by poverty, brutal poverty. And my father was a sharecropper's kid, and I went down to where he was born, and I just took pictures of all these shacks by the side of the road, and took those back to my team. That's the wonderful thing about theater. You have a team, and every part of the team tells the story. And so I took those back to my set designer, and because the story was about isolation, he created a set. We may have a picture of it that by and of itself told a story of isolation. These were my research pictures. And the playwright, Irene Fornez, specified that she wanted bleached white wood. So these are the characters. May, the lead character, is on the left ironing, and there's Lloyd, her companion. And this set existed in pitch black. And so you got the sense of isolation. And you can also see from Lloyd's costume, it's ragged, it's torn, it's stained. So every artist is part of telling that story. The fabric on a costume will tell the story. The cut of a costume, the lighting, the shadow and lighting will tell part of the story. And the set, obviously. Yeah. It's on a mound of mud. So we created mud and lit it in various ways, the red or the white. There's May reading, but you can see her feet are stained with mud. And every piece, every element of this is part of the storytelling.
They're Emory students, correct?
These are Emory students, yes. These two beautiful actors are Emory students who really walked into that, and it's a violent play. It's the language is tough, and they just ate it up.
It's great to see the images. And we have more images and about mud following the QR code. I do want to open as far as the building blocks of storytelling from your perspective. And Roxana, maybe you can start by bringing it back to science when you think about translating science to broad audiences with and for communities.
Yeah, so for example, when we want to give the results back to the agricultural community, we work with the Farm Workers Association of Florida, their community health workers, to develop presentations that are understandable for the farm worker community. And so I have to do a lot of listening to how it is that they want to phrase things. And make sure that it still kind of aligns with the results of our studies. But it's really important to give back these results to the community members because it kind of shows them, how it is, it gives them some an ending of what the study found, lets them know what the study found and what it is that we're doing with the results. And then the Farm Workers Association and we're able to also say, how we're using these results to try to improve their living and working conditions, how these results are being used to help advance policies to protect farm workers. So for me, it's a lot of listening to the community health workers and how this should be explained and told.
I'll just share from my work. One of the challenging things that I have to do is convince people to agree to sit down and do an interview with us. And a lot of times that means talking about the worst day of their entire life. And I have to try and convince them why there's some value in telling their story and what it could do for them. And I also know at the same time that could also be extremely painful for them to talk about that. And walking that line can be really difficult, but I encourage people to think about the fact that if you can use your loss to educate others so that other people won't have to experience the same pain that you've had to experience, that often resonates with people, especially people who have lost someone. But it can be really difficult, and you also have to be understanding that a lot of these people are also in very vulnerable positions. And sometimes we talk about undocumented communities. People don't want to talk because they're afraid there could be repercussions for them speaking out. And it can be a really difficult balance.
We often see that having the conversation. follow-up for Roxana and Jeremy. What does storytelling mean for the community? How can scientists and journalists partner with each other and communities, tell stories in a way that honors people's and benefits them in terms of attention, earnings, or things like that? Touch on some of this, but we'd like to hear more. And what, in your experience, tends to happen after an important story is told?
That was really long. No. So what do these stories mean to the community? Well, I can tell you that there are some farm workers who are very eager to tell their stories. And I remember once a group of farm workers, I was there with cameras, and they said, we were asking them if they would allow us to film, and they said, yeah, film. Let the world see that we're good workers. We're here to work. We're not here being criminals. Let the world know that we are hardworking people. And so I think that they really want the world to know that despite some of this anti-immigrant rhetoric that immigrants are terrible people, we are not. And once these stories come out, they feel pride. They feel pride in knowing that their stories are out there, that people are reading them, and they are hopeful. They are hopeful that these stories will eventually lead to some change, maybe not for them, but certainly for future generations of farm workers, because we need them.
Yeah, no, I'll just follow up that including their voices in these pieces and understanding that especially our stuff is going to reach a global audience all around the world, and people are going to understand what their strife has been and what they're going through in their personal experiences, that communities can take a lot of value from that and feel like they're contributing to a greater good, which is a net positive.
Say something. I just want to say this before it gets away from me. I love that you mentioned Cesar Chavez, and there's this wonderful pollination that between theater and Cesar Chavez, because he was part of El Teatro Campesino, who created the theater on the backs of flatbed trucks in Los Angeles. It led to the United Farm Workers, with theater being performed for the farm workers while they're in the fields picking grapes and lettuce. And so I just wanted to hold him up for a minute, and your work in that theater, yeah, how stories affect change.
In social movements, theater is very important. Music is very important. Storytelling is very important. And that just shows, how powerful this can be.
Study that we looked at in some of our public health classes actually was the song that was created and broadcast over actually was the mechanism that people were able to like to bring it back to Grace for a sec. So your work with Charter, advocating for children's environment, but also you speak directly, including through gaming. Gaming is so interesting. Authentic storytelling because for a variety of reasons, but including the fact that people can choose often a very democratic. That influences behavior. And you don't need like a big company. Talk to us a little bit more about that, and maybe focus on your work with Charter a little bit.
Yeah, I don't know if there are lots of parents here, but I have a love-hate relationship with Roblox. Roblox, the game. In the past, when I was younger, we used to grow up with console games where you were the only player, right? The Nintendo Game Boys. And you essentially had one character, you followed a storyline, and you were a single player. But now the games have become completely social. Um, there are different names for these places. You can call them social XR games or the metaverse, as some people like to call it. But Roblox is essentially maybe the digital playground for any child who is interested in creating their own microcosm, just like the way that we used to go out in playgrounds and parks and, strike up conversations with some random kid and we've never met them before, but now we're best friends at the end of the day. They're doing this in the virtual worlds and creating their make-believe worlds of it. And if you carefully observe exactly what is going on in this gameplay, the game environment itself is set up for some other purpose. Do the kids follow that? Not necessarily. They are building their own narratives. They're building their own stories. Everybody plays a certain role in this. They get together, they cooperate, right? So it's just like the make-believe plays that we used to have. But in this digitized world, because now they really lack the same physical spaces that we used to hang out when we were younger. So now their digital play spaces are giving them lots of freedom. If they are missing some object, then they just create it. They ask each other to, hey, can you make a set of wings for me? Or can I buy a rocket pack off of you so that now I can fly? And it's really interesting to see that these sorts of spaces kind of overcome a lot of the temporal and the spatial barriers that we used to have as children. So our friends were local. Nowadays, their friends are global, right? They're playing with kids who are perhaps not even living in their same time zone. And as a result, they are now exposed to the things that we were able to only get exposure to through travel. You had to like go physically to a different environment, a different country to get exposure to different types of people and their conversations and their cultures. Nowadays, it's sort of anybody who can have internet access or cell data access. And why is this important, right? To get exposure of stories that are being told outside of your own culture or your own vicinity. It's because people are able to really get that openness to experiences, right? And when they do that, this is, I think, where a lot of that creativity comes in. When they are experiencing stories that are not necessarily told within their families or within the vicinity of their geographical location, is where they are opening their eyes to new things, to exposures that they've never had in their lives. And this is, I think, awe-inspiring. And I think when stories are awe-inspiring, right, makes your heart pitter-patter, that's where it leaves impact and it becomes memorable. And so these game spaces can be used to tell these stories that really aren't told anywhere else, right? To get these kids in a space where, without having to get on a plane, they're already in there. Recently, for the Children's Environmental Health Day, we actually had a physical book reading that Abby led in Atlanta, and then we had a virtual book reading in Roblox. And the kids are all controlling their little avatars and they're sitting on the virtual blankets and listening to this book reading, which I initially thought, well, this is not really a game, right? It's listening to a book. Would they do it? They loved it. Kids came back again and again, like sat there 3 times to listen to the same darn book in Roblox. And that just blew my mind. And if you were to get somebody, like if you ask a kid, do you want to go to a book reading? They might say no, but do you want to do it in Roblox? And they're like, yeah, I'll give it a shot. Maybe it's not the same book that I know, right? And so this natural draw to things that they might not want to do in the physical world, but now they suddenly feel like it's a game, is very conducive to these sorts of mechanisms to, bridge the generational gaps.
Are there any that you'd like to share with the audience?
Yeah, this one is the redlining world that we created. So you are following the life story of Linda. And she takes you through her 50 years of experience living through redlining. And you walk back to over time in time to when she becomes 10 years old, all the way into her 60s. And she shows you around her place, like how the water quality changed, the air quality is different because you can open up the window and the curtains and see a factory built right outside. So you get to see the newspaper clippings that were actually featured during that date. You get to see a news clipping. And she essentially invites you as a neighbor to kind of go through these very mundane activities. Like, let's have tea. Come with me and walk with me as I tell you the story. So in this way, it's very similar to theater, but almost like an immersive virtual version of that theater. And so we're script writing, and a lot of the script writing was in collaboration with the Center for Black Women's Wellness. They built that script with us and went through sort of the iterations of this world until both parties were satisfied.
I want to pause there on. Our next question is actually about ownership. And across your all's various disciplines, and maybe an important part of advocacy work is knowing when it's appropriate, what's appropriate as an ally, and think about that in your work or when you counsel mentees or teach your all students. How do you talk to them about ownership and how do you draw those?
In the classroom, there's a little more wiggle room for that. It's a place where you can really learn what is when it's your time to step forward and when it's your time to step back. I think in the professional world, the boundaries are a little harder and faster. And in my belief, the more personal a story, the more the boundaries should be respected. And the margins grow narrower for who tells that story, because there's a history of stories being co-opted and told by people that who are denying others the chance to tell that story. And also, but one of the things we do in my class is a lot of times I will take a scene and I'll say, come and do it in your native tongue. And so we'll have this celebration of something. It could be written by Chekhov or, I don't know, Shakespeare, little scene. And we'll have people talking back and forth and exchanging the same dialogue. I may speak to you in Hindi and you'll respond to me in Mandarin. And the story holds up. So I think there's a way to celebrate who people are, and also to remember that when you witness a story, it's very, very powerful when you witness somebody else's story. You don't have to be the storyteller to have an impact.
Well, we're going to take questions. We're going to pass around to Mike. I'm going to hand this over and he will come to you.
Well, thank you for this workshop. It's really, really wonderful and very exciting to see how I wanted to tie something together with how you started this workshop with persuasion. And it's not lost on me the power and the impact of the intersectionality that's going on here. So can you imagine doing the same story with research, with the docufilm, with the theater, with a virtual reality? If used together for the same influential purpose, it could really pack a big punch in terms of moving.
Hi. I have a question regarding when we talk about the farm workers and we talk about many of them being young men and we address about, their stories and, the issues they're dealing with and the role of theater in conveying that story. I was interested in learning about the presence of the women of their culture who, if they have a presence there, how do they, the work that they do to try to ease the burden of many of those men working in the farm workers, the world of theater. I mean, we talk about Cesar Chavez, but then there was Dolores Huerta as well. And so what role they did, same with in regards to the sister that was addressing trying to get her son out of prison and also the issue of toxicity that affects Black American women's health. We hear often the pain, right? But what about the feminine aesthetics that they are using to combat those issues, whether it be growing gardens or finding creative ways to, clean up their water on their own accord, not necessarily waiting for someone else to do it. So if anyone could address that, that would be really cool. Thank you.
Yeah, women play an important role in farm work. And actually in our studies, the majority of our participants are women. I think like 65% of them are women. And then they kind of drag their husbands to participate in the studies or but we do usually think of farm workers, we usually think it's men, but as men have transitioned to other jobs like construction, more women are filling the jobs of agricultural workers. And, some of the things that is we do need more stories about the women in ag. And some of the things, I'm just remembering from our field data collection of women talking about how they prepare water and they'll add fruit to the water so that they're able to drink it better, so that their husband will drink it better, how they do what they call licuados, which are these vegetable shakes to try to be more healthy, because we've told them at one visit that they may be, have pre-diabetes or they have high blood pressure. So they start changing how they eat and how their families eat. And so, yes, Dolores Huerta is a very powerful person too, who's still, we're very lucky to have her, that she's still alive. And yeah, I think we do need to tell better stories of the women in agriculture.
I was going to say the term that we use in our storytelling is the fight back. So often our stories deal with like major, large scale injustices and how it's impacting people. And then a big part of our story is, well, what's the fight back? What's being done about it? What are they doing about it? And being able to include that as part of our storytelling is often essential and helpful, and sometimes can have a little bit of positivity. One of my self-criticisms that I always talk with my team about is actually including a little bit of a sense of humor in our storytelling, because we're always dealing with these extremely serious topics. Can we instill a little bit of sense of humor? It's okay to laugh and smile. But the fight back is definitely a really key element of our storytelling.
Hi, my name is Jamie Dion over at the School of Law. Hi, everyone. You may mention earlier the ability to identify a character that can tell a story that the audience will grab hold of. I'm hoping that both Grace and Marilyn can share their experience of how they craft their characters who are strong enough to carry the story forward as well.
So sometimes we place the user as the protagonist. We don't have a separate storyteller. We don't have a narrator. They go through these experiences on their own to co-create that narrative arc. Sometimes we'll have someone like Linda who needs her story to be told, but I had this really interesting conversation with my grad student just yesterday about this. Yes, it's important for getting these stories from the original source, but that really kind of places this undue burden on these people who have to continue to tell these stories. So if we are able to build characters that reflect as much of that person's characteristics, then that would be sort of this, it's not in person, but as close to the real life experience as we can get, and which is why we've worked pretty closely with these community organizations to get the story right. And the iteration that you see here is a result of maybe about 20 versions of us building their story from the source, testing them, pulling them into conversation, and then reviewing again and again. What's really interesting about these virtual worlds is that, unfortunately, a lot of it is built by white male programmers. The device itself is designed by white male programmers, and therefore, a lot of what we try to build here, designing, is not meant to be diverse. You don't really have even objects, accessories, hair pieces that reflect the diversity of these characters. And so that's why we want to make sure that when we work with these community organizations, they look at the homes, they look at the environment, whether or not it's culturally appropriate. And so we work with them very closely to make sure that their story is being told the way that they want it to be told. And therefore, we're able to bring people into the homes to sort of immerse them in this environment. So oftentimes the character is almost a simulation of a person that wants to tell the story, because it's not a video feed, but much more interactive. And so that's how we built the redlining world that you just saw.
I want to make sure I understand your question is how do you build or find characters that are strong enough to, well, that's a great question. And a lot of times that's the story, because no one believes that they're strong enough, and then they are. It's like Simba in The Lion King. Simba doesn't know he's worthy of being the king, but that's the story. He discovers that. And so that's the story itself. When you find a common person who has no idea that they are really a powerful human being. Sorry?
Hero's journey. Thank you.
Hi, I'm Abby Mudick. I'm a professor here at the School of Nursing. And this talk is awesome. Thank you guys so much for your insights. And I'm definitely on the geek side of things and could do this all night. But I'll try to keep this short, huh? One of the questions that comes to mind the most today for me is this idea that sometimes you have these really deep, powerful stories that must be unfolded. And in health and nursing especially, we really want to get to that positive side, kind of like what you had just talked about here a few minutes ago. And we don't want to dive into the icky part very long, because that's really sad and dark. And I find this even when I'm teaching about climate or about other kinds of environmental hazards, it's dark pretty quick and it's not pretty. And getting to that light side, or that, to wrap it up with a pretty little bow, sometimes feels really artificial. And how do you balance that in your storytelling, the timeline of it? And when we all seek better health behaviors, sometimes there's just nothing feasible in the near future.
So one component that I'll say that is important to that is resiliency. So again, lots of the stories that we do are about difficult circumstances. We did a documentary about the women in the South Georgia ICE detention facility who had unnecessary medical procedures done to them. And I had to identify 3 of the women who would agree to speak with us on camera. And I think that there's something about, we use the term resiliency. It means a bunch of different things. But to me, it means the process of overcoming or fighting up against the challenges that you face that are dark. And there's something that's beautiful in that. And if you can capture the resiliency that people have to survive and move forward, then there's a way to have a positive light in a story that's otherwise pretty dark.
Yeah, so as you know, most of our experiences are theoretically driven. There's a lot of social science theory behind this, exactly explained very well by Jeremy. But we know that in order for people to start paying attention, there needs to be a sufficient level of threat, not too high, because once you hit what we know to be mortality salience, so people realize that they're going to die anyway, then they don't see the point. So they stop trying. They're like, well, we're going to die anyway. So what's the point of changing behavior? But it needs to be sufficient enough to catch attention. And you don't want to leave it after threatening them, right? Letting them know that they're going to die isn't going to change behavior. So what do? You give them ways to get out of it. And we call that self-efficacy. So once you get their attention, grab their attention through threatening, what is it that they need to do to get out of this situation? And if there's no answer, and if you just let them know climate change is here, but there's no solution, then it's sort of, then it reminds me of the movie Don't Look Up. If we're dying, then might as well party through it. And this is not the result that we want as health behavior change scientists. And in order for them to know what to do, we have to specifically let them know, here are the actionable plans, which is where Charter's effort focuses primarily on giving people very clear, simple, actionable plans.
Would you say that threat is necessary to a good story?
To catch attention, to break through the apathy, but again, not too high, not too low, always backed up with efficacy. Well, that's at least what the theory would say.
We can wrap it up, and Grace has a VR demo area right through that door there. It's usually a little student lounge, but if anybody would like to try, she'll be out there doing, you could try it for yourselves. But otherwise, please hang out, grab some food, feel free to talk to the experts. Thank you so much, everybody, for coming. Thank you for your time. Thank you to our experts for their time. Thank you, Brian, for being here with us, and any of the helpers. And thank you, Jasmine, anyone else who was here today to help with the event. We appreciate everyone's effort so much. We'll be sharing the video, distributing it through the Charter Network and some of our other networks. And if anybody would like to see the recording, of course, it'll be available afterwards as well. Thank you so much.